I would argue there's no objective meaning to the universe. We make our own meaning.
But is that really possible, to create meaning in a meaningless world? Jordan Peterson, who recently hosted Lawrence Krauss on his podcast, doesn't think so, and neither do I. In this video, I will walk you through their conversation about purpose and tell you why I believe that Krauss's argument, even though it fails, actually has quite some appeal. I'll also share why this caused me to really wrestle personally with the question of meaning and purpose. My name is Lucas, by the way, and I'm super excited about this video. What caught my attention as I watched that conversation was when Krauss started to elaborate on an interesting idea which served as a stepping stone for his argument against an objective purpose behind the universe. He said that while we render our perception of the physical world typically in ways that classical physics does, those classical pictures are always going to be insufficient or even inaccurate, because the world as it really is ultimately operates not according to the laws of classical physics, but according to quantum physics.
Because the real world is quantum mechanical, and any classical picture we impose on it is going to be crazy. But you don't have to think of them as real. They're all just different approximations to a reality, an underlying reality, which can't be described by any classical picture. So that's why all these classical pictures seem crazy, because none of them is complete.
Based on that, he then moved on to establish that
the world of our experience is an illusion. Now, I know I hate to say it because it breeds all sorts of mumbo jumbo and people start doing, but at a fundamental scale, at the small scales, everything that defines our universe, including matter and mass, really the things that make the universe we experience, are really accidents of our circumstances, rather than fundamental properties of the universe.
If I got Krauss correctly, he's saying the following: our experience of the universe happens in one way, as classical physics describes it. However, at the fundamental level, the universe functions in a very different way, as quantum physics describes it. Therefore, the world of our experience is an illusion. With this, Krauss is basically tapping into one of the big questions philosophers have been discussing for centuries, long before the rise of quantum theory. That is, whether our perception can be trusted to deliver a true picture of reality. However, Krauss doesn't just drive his argument to the conclusion that our experience is an illusion, but also to the conclusion that the universe is an accident. Listen again closely to what he says.
Really, the things that make the universe we experience, are really accidents of our circumstances, rather than fundamental properties of the universe.
Again, Krauss is onto something for sure in raising the question of whether our senses deliver a true picture of the world, given the discrepancy between the quantum mechanical picture underlying the universe and the classical mechanical picture emerging from our sense perception. However, to claim based on that discrepancy that the universe has no purpose is quite a different ballgame. Yet, that's what Krauss seems to have in mind when he says that the things that make the universe we experience, are really accidents of our circumstances. Jordan, at least, understands this to be Krauss's exact point, which is why he responds by saying,
yeah, well, that's something I would like, and we can do this again when we talk again, because I'm always curious about that leap into purposelessness.
The leap into purposelessness. Man, I love this expression. And yes, like Peterson, I'm curious why people take that leap so quickly, it seems. I've got a friend who calls herself an agnostic atheist and nihilist, and she lives in almost constant existential despair and anxiety. The other day, she came to me with tears in her eyes, sharing about her suicidal thoughts. Now, I found myself in a dilemma because I really wanted to lift her up and encourage her, but I also felt like this is kind of impossible to do given her worldview. I mean, on what grounds could I possibly offer her hope given that she's convinced that everything is ultimately meaningless? Jordan goes on to talk about the emergence of organic life 3.5 billion years ago, an event he deems a radical increase in complexity, and then turns it back to Krauss with the challenge to reconcile that with the idea of an accidental universe, to which Krauss replies,
well, okay, it's a good question. And the answer is, it's all momentary. It's a momentary accident. It is true that the stars, as individual stars evolve, they build up heavier and heavier elements. Okay, they do it at the expense of their surroundings by increasing the disorder in their surroundings, right? They're emitting energy.
Right.
Okay, so there's no
so there's
violation of the second law.
there's localized increase in complexity, like us.
Yeah, but it's all momentary. If you follow it long enough, the heavy elements are going to disappear, matter's going to disappear, and the long term, the universe will just be pure radiation again. So this buildup of complexity, which you're absolutely sure is not a direction of the universe. It's a momentary but fortunate imbalance that will exist for a while until the universe catches up with it.
Essentially, Krauss is saying that compared to the grand scheme of things, the universe features organic life only during a tiny little time span. Thus, even though life may look meaningful to us, it is nothing but a momentary accident, as he puts it, or a momentary but fortunate imbalance that will exist for a while until the universe catches up with it. You might know that this line of reasoning is not unusual for those who deny that there is meaning behind the universe. The exact same principle comes into play when people make the following claim, and I'm pretty sure you've heard this before. When compared to the unfathomable number of galaxies and the size of the universe, so the argument goes, planet Earth is insignificantly small, nothing but a pale blue dot, and so there is no reason to think that we are in any way special. I can understand why people think this is a valid argument. The universe is big, we are small, and so clearly thinking that we have some sort of special significance seems kind of off when we consider the relations one to the other. But it is not a valid argument, and here is why. Comparing numbers, spatial extensions, and timescales cannot logically tell us anything about significance and meaning. All these comparisons accomplish is the stating of a truism, namely that planet Earth is a little dot compared to the size of the entire universe, and that organic life appears for only part of the billions of years of the universe's existence. But to think that such comparative truisms offer an actual argument concerning meaning, value, or purpose is fallacious. If one granted that they did, one may well make the case that such crazy-looking relations in terms of space and time don't actually do away with meaning and value, but rather affirm it. I mean, miners sift through tons of rocks and ore in order to unearth just one tiny little diamond, and yet people are willing to pay thousands of dollars for it. Athletes spend years, even decades, of training to make it to the Olympics or some other world championship, whereas actually participating in the games and receiving a medal may just take a couple of minutes. Yet we regard standing on that pedestal as a big deal. These were my thoughts in response to Krauss's claim that the emergence of life is just a momentary accident. Jordan took quite a different route.
Now that's a real problem in discussing concepts, isn't it? Because you can take a time scale and change the time scale, and all of a sudden the phenomena changes completely. You know, that's what people do to themselves often when they think about the meaninglessness of their life. It's like, well, wait a second, I could make the case, and I've made this with my clients approximately, is if you're thinking on a time scale that makes your life irrelevant, that's the wrong time scale for the problem. That's the hopelessness is an indication that you're using the wrong frame.
Absolutely.
And you'd say, well, what's the proof of that? And I would say, well, the hopelessness is the proof of that. Now, you might not regard that as proof, but it's a point that's at least worth considering. You know, because you could say, well, what good is a Beethoven symphony across a span of 1 trillion years? It's like, well, none, but why? What good is posing that question?
I really like the simplicity of Peterson's question, which is essentially this. Hey, who says that we should be comparing the emergence of life or the life of an individual person to the billions of years of the universe's existence? Who says that this is a legitimate move in the first place? And he takes it even further by making a very pragmatic point, which is the fact that such comparisons yield a sense of hopelessness suggests that they really aren't useful. Sure, he admits that he doesn't have proof for this suggestion, other than his own conviction that hopelessness just isn't a good thing. And maybe you can say, well, Peterson is just too afraid to face the darkness and meaninglessness of our existence. But note that Peterson is simply asking Krauss to make an argument for why we should be making those large-scale comparisons in the first place. Krauss, on the other hand, has taken it for granted, and uncritically so, that this move is warranted. In reaction to that, Peterson has given us a counter-argument that has at least pragmatic force and intuitive appeal, as he points out that an intellectual exercise which leads to hopelessness should make us think twice. Now, what I found funny and weird is that in his response, Krauss, without answering the question Peterson raised, says that he agrees, and he then moves on to reiterate that there is no meaning to the universe, even though that's exactly not what Peterson had just said.
What good is posing that question?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. The fact that we have, there's no obvious purpose to the universe, the fact that we and everything we've created will long be gone, that can depress you. But the opposite side of the coin, it seems to me, if I were a clinician, that I would try to argue to my clients, is that it makes every moment of that accident of your own existence special. And every instant is more special because it's finite, because it's so unique. And therefore, you're right, there may be no cosmic purpose to your existence, but you create your own purpose. I know you write about meaning, you wrote a whole book about meaning, but I would argue there's no objective meaning to the universe. We make our own meaning. And to the extent we make our own meaning, our lives are more or less valuable to us and to others around us. And so I would
I would quibble with that. And maybe it's not just a quibble, because I don't think meaning is something we create. I think it's something that manifests itself to us. Now, look, I know it's not that simple, because we do make decisions, but it's very frequently the case. And you know this as a scientist. For example, you may have a moment of insight into some phenomena. So that's deeply meaningful. But it isn't so much that is something you create, although you can seek it out. It's more like that's something that bursts on you.
So here is the fundamental difference between Krauss and Peterson. Peterson believes that meaning is not something we create, but it is out there, so to speak, and it bursts on us, particularly in the form of scientific discoveries, which we, including Krauss, find meaningful as they reveal to us the structure upon which the universe is built. In contrast, Krauss believes that we make our own meaning and that there is no obvious purpose to the universe, because we and everything we've created will long be gone. He also says that this makes every moment of that accident of your existence special, and every instance is more special because it's finite and because it's so unique. Now, here is what I'm wondering, and with this, I come to that key question which this conversation caused me to wrestle with. If we truly are an accident, if Krauss really means that when he says it, how could he also hold that we are special? I mean, when we speak of an accident, we speak of something that isn't supposed to happen. We speak of something that is actually tragic, if not fatal. But if we truly are such an accident, how could we also be special? I mean, we could be special, I guess, but only in a negative sense, since accidents are extraordinary things that should not occur. Now, don't get me wrong, at this stage I'm really not asking these questions in a rhetorical kind of fashion to try and point out the flaw in Krauss's view. I'm simply and truly wondering whether he really believes what he is saying. You see, I can understand that there is some appeal to the idea that because everything will long be gone and because you just happen to pop up randomly, this adds stakes to your existence, in that you have just this one chance to make the best out of everything. In contrast to that, there is of course the argument made by the Christian theist, which claims the exact opposite. Namely, if everything is doomed to dissolve into non-existence again, none of what we do will ultimately matter, and there isn't anything special that will ever be remembered as such. And it's actually not only theists who have argued along those lines, but even prominent atheist thinkers and philosophers like Camus, Sartre and Russell. The argument continues to say that if what's ultimately ahead of us is not death and the universe that's run out of energy, but eternal life instead, then our existence is eternally significant. It would mean that the emergence of life 3.5 billion years ago is anything but a momentary accident on the large scale of things. Because life doesn't just stay around for some time, but it carries on eternally instead. And surely, if our lives can supposedly be meaningful, even though they're just a momentary accident, as Krauss's reasoning tells us, how much more meaningful are they if they don't just last for some moment, but for an eternal succession of moments? Now, I get that eternal life is a rather difficult concept to wrap your head around. And of course, skeptics will usually tell you that there is no proof of such a thing and that it's easier to simply hold that your existence is over once you die. Also, for a lot of people, as they go through daily life, they actually feel that what they do is meaningful, even though they're not constantly thinking about eternity. I mean, this was certainly true of me both before I became a Christian and even for a time after I became one in my early 20s. I hadn't given eternal life much thought up to that point simply because I was too busy being excited about this life, and I really did feel like my life was meaningful without having to add an eternal perspective to it. So in this sense, I don't blame the skeptic for not buying that the meaning and significance of our existence is bound to our lives being eternal, because it seems like it takes such a concerted effort to think about the concept of eternal life in the first place. However, here is what I wonder, and I really do. Doesn't it also take a concerted effort to tell yourself that you're both an accident and yet special? That you can come up with some random purpose even though the universe is ultimately purposeless? You see, on the one hand, I do think that philosophically speaking, the case Krauss advances is impossible to maintain. Namely, that even though we're just a momentary accident in a universe that is devoid of meaning, our existence is still meaningful. However, I also believe that practically speaking, many people still do feel that their day-to-day life is meaningful, even if they profess to be an accident in a purposeless universe. So what I'm asking myself is this. Even if it holds true, philosophically speaking, that the notion of creating meaning in a meaningless universe is nonsensical, even if it holds true that you cannot be both an accident and special, how useful is it to have this discussion about meaning, given that many people feel, practically speaking, that they do have meaning, even as they see themselves as an accident? That's ultimately the question the conversation between Peterson and Krauss brought up for me, and that I'd be interested in hearing what you think. I'll also do a second video on that same conversation, which will be focused on a different topic.
If we weren't all religious, we wouldn't need science. If we didn't all want to believe.
Right, that's exactly right, man.
And
man, I was positively shocked when I heard Krauss say that, which is why I want to talk about this in another video. So subscribe and hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next one.